listening to Angel Nears, the podcast. Angel Nears is a Silicon Valley community for startup builders where founders and operators share their firsthand knowledge on building and scaling startups. I'm going to be your host today, Ole Kujikov, and our guest is William MacMillan, a Chief Product Officer at Andesite. Will, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, Ole. Great to be here. I appreciate it.
Yeah, excited to have Will on. He is a U.S. Air Force veteran who previously served as CISO, I believe that's how it's pronounced, at the Central Intelligence Agency, CIA is how that's pronounced, and Senior Vice President of Information Security Salesforce. A couple of pretty big experiences there. Can you unpack that for a civilian real quick?
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to. I'm old, so this might take a quick minute, but I'll try to be brief. I went to the Air Force Academy a million years ago and then spent a decade in the Air Force as a helo pilot in the combat rescue and special ops communities. I loved it, especially the international part, dealing with foreign cultures, languages, that sort of thing. So that led me to the Central Intelligence Agency, where I spent about 20 years in operations, different types of operations. A lot of my time was spent in a variety of cyber leadership roles. And I ultimately retired in January of 2022 as the Chief Information Security Officer. Then, as you said, I went to Salesforce, where I was part of the cybersecurity leadership team. And while there in that role, my friend Brian Carbaugh, who is the CEO of Andesite and who I've known since we were cadets together at the Air Force Academy, he asked me to join him and our CTO, Alex Thaman, as they built the company. So here I am at Andesite as a CPO, and Brian's focus there was really to make sure that we're building a company and a culture that's focused on the challenges faced by cyber defense teams.
Awesome. Yeah, it sounds like you've built a little team of trusted pilots, I guess, and now you got your own project. If you could summarize the core value that you're providing at Andesite in one sentence, could you do that?
Yeah, I think I could. I think our mission statement says it all. Andesite delivers a sustained advantage to cyber defense teams. And of course, that requires a little unpacking. That's, kind of a high level thing, but that's the sentence to start from.
Yeah. It sounds simple, but I'm sure it's more complicated than that. So let's talk about it. Maybe what's failed in the past and why generally?
Yeah, if you walk into a modern SOC, a security operations center, which is sort of the nerve center of cybersecurity teams, what you find is a lot of data overwhelm, a lot of noise and confusion about priorities. I like to say there are, too many dinging chimes and blinking lights and, alerts flashing on the screen. And a lot of analyst time in those SOCs is spent just trying to figure out what to focus on. It's just a very noisy and inefficient place.
So, take me into a SOC. I've never been to a SOC. I actually think I know what a SOC is, but I'm sure you're going to tell me it's something else. So let's define it. And, what's a day in the life, I guess, in a SOC?
Yeah, sure. Well, Let's talk about SOCs really briefly in general. For as long as humans have needed to coordinate complex actions and make decisions as teams, they've been using operations centers, right? OCS, before we added the S to it. Fascinating history, goes back thousands and thousands of years. When you roll into the late 1980s, early 1990s, the need for these operations centers started extending into the cyber domain. And you started seeing the rise of CERTs and SOCs, computer emergency response teams, and security operations centers. For a while, a typical SOC was really a physical thing. You would walk into a big room with monitors, dry erase boards all over the place, and people working side by side. Today, to start answering your question, a lot more SOCs are virtual affairs. The team members can be distributed all over the place. Some people call the old physical SOCs Hollywood SOCs, and they mean that in kind of a derogatory fashion, like it's just for flash. I have to admit, to be honest with you, that I'm a little bit partial to the physical SOCs, right? I'm old school and I like people sitting next to each other, but they can be virtual nowadays. And then the last thing I have to mention before the day in the life stuff is that a lot of SOCs nowadays are what we call hybrid, meaning some of the SOC functions are in that cybersecurity team and some of them are offloaded to a managed security service provider, right? So they kind of divide and conquer because of that alert fatigue, the data overwhelm that we talked about. So, day in the life is these young, talented analysts sitting side by side, just trying to defend these networks and respond to all of these alerts and indicators that they're drowning in.
Right. And this is sort of the data explosion that we're here to talk about today. I guess, how has this happened and how has it impacted the ability of SOC analysts to do their job day to day?
Yeah, the how has it happened part, for 25 years or more, the cybersecurity industry with best intentions has produced point solution after point solution, right? They've taken very talented teams have taken very technical approaches to trying to, deal with one corner of the ecosystem that's too noisy or where there's not enough visibility. And so they develop all these new technologies that roll out in waves. We talk about things like SIEMs and SOAR and EDR, NDR, XDR. There's all this very nerdy terminology in SOCs, but all of these tools contribute to this data overwhelm, and the human costs of that are extremely real. I mean, we can get into this if you want. I have a lot of personal experience with analysts who are very burned out, depressed. It's causing them to second guess whether they want to stay in the field at all. That's ubiquitous. And then from an enterprise perspective, the organization itself, the impact of that in terms of cyber risk it's massive, right? So if your analysts are overworked, overwhelmed, and not operating at the top of their game, that leaves a lot of untreated risk in the alert queues, so to speak.
Yeah, it sounds like a mess, right? It sounds like we had a problem to deal with of security, and we came up with these solutions, point solutions and alarms, and we kept adding and adding and adding, and now it's like our solutions have kind of become the problem, and now we have a new problem. Analysts aren't, able to focus and do their jobs because they're overwhelmed with all this information. And it just leads to bad consequences down the line. All the while, probably the threats are getting more real. So, yeah, are there any other limitations of this traditional system that might be rules based? And why would that be ill equipped to handle the modern cyber threats that are out there today? Yeah,
so it's interesting that you bring up rule-based systems, right, which have really predominated for a while now in cyber. Rule-based systems can absolutely help. In fact, you see a lot of rule-based approaches to detection engineering, which is sort of a discipline in cybersecurity. But rule-based systems require constant care and attention to keep up with change, both inside and outside the firewalls, right? So inside the firewalls, your enterprise network is a living thing. It adapts and evolves on a continual basis. Outside the firewalls, threat actors adapt their tactics, techniques, and procedures constantly. Think about researchers, for example, that are creating vaccines for the flu, right? They have to update it every year because the viruses that cause the flu are constantly evolving. They can't just build a vaccine one time and have it work forever, right? They have to, it's this cat and mouse that goes back and forth. And it's kind of the same thing in cyber. Mm.
Got it. And yeah, so the threats are growing and getting nastier while maybe things inside that living system aren't really growing as fast as they need to be. And let me guess, do you have a solution for that that we can talk about today?
Yeah, we do. There's, I talk about this being the very, very beginning. I mean, the opening paragraph of what's going to go down in history as a golden era of SOC automation and SOC augmentation. And it's really because of the nature of the tech that is hitting the streets, right? Which is why we're able to take a new approach in the SOC, right? With some of the Gen AI that's coming online that can be built into these new products, we finally have AI that can reason over unstructured data and draw semantic meaning without explicit programming. That's a fancy way of saying that these systems can now make connections between words and concepts in ways that feel almost human-like. It's a big shift from tech that required everything to be neatly structured and categorized, right? And when we marry that tech up with humans in a SOC, we allow the humans and the AI to both teach and learn from one another. It's transformative.
So I'm just curious, did you have an aha moment with this after the sort of explosion of AI onto the scene in, I think, 2022? Or have you maybe been, you've been in this industry for a long time. These tools, people have been talking about them, AI, for decades, not years. So I'm just wondering, did you see the tech where it's at today? And did you have sort of an aha? Or is this something maybe you've been thinking about longer that you've sort of been waiting for and you feel like now might be time? Did you have like one moment where, it all came to fruition for you?
I don't want to steal credit for the aha moment. I think the aha moment for me was when my teammate, Alex Thaman, our CTO, when he and I were doing customer research and sort of diving into the problem space and trying to figure out, this is like pre-product vision. And Alex, who is a very gifted technologist and has worked in AI for many years at big companies, small companies, startups, I think he realized that some of these workflows that were being described to us were being thwarted by these structured approaches. And he understands Gen AI on a very deep level. And so he started introducing some ideas, hypotheses that we wanted to test about being able to take a less structured approach that conforms better to, sort of the dynamic micro judgments that analysts have to make in a SOC on a daily basis.
So that's kind of like the answer I did want to hear. It's always interesting when speaking to people that are starting companies, like how they kind of got interested in what they're doing. So anyway, let's get back to sort of smashing through these structures. I want you to unpack that a little bit. Like, what kind of structured approaches? What do you mean by that in SOCs? And then how can maybe the tools of today help overcome those structures? What do you exactly mean by that?
Yeah, I mean, think about there's a term that we use in cybersecurity a lot, playbooks, right? People use playbooks. They try to take templated approaches to problem solving. We have an entire category of technology called SOAR, Security, Orchestration, Automation, and Response, which I refer to as sort of an if this, then that kind of an approach to automation, right? The problem is, go back to this inside the firewall, outside the firewall dynamic state. When you think about a network environment that is constantly changing and a threat landscape that is constantly evolving, and you try to take this if this, then that approach, it has a very, very short half-life, and then it needs to be tended to, and humans need to update it, and they need to curate and sort of analyze what's going on. And so you find yourselves with big teams that have to tend to this kit all the time in order to free the analysts from the toil of having to deal with all this stuff. That's sort of the problem space. The new tech that's rolling out allows you to think of it as like shortcutting workflow, right? You can dynamically go right to, hey, this is the problem. This is the thing I need to deal with. This is the box I need to isolate, or whatever the case may be. You don't have to worry about the brittleness of those playbooks and of those SOAR templates.
Okay. The problems will be uncovered faster because the AI won't have to kind of jump through the same hoops or the same playbooks. It's almost like okay, I see what you mean by structure. It's like the structure of how the analyst might do work is what's holding them back from like arriving at a solution kind of quickly.
Well, there's more to it, right? So you're hitting on some really interesting areas. One of the biggest problems in the SOC, we have a statistic that we use on our team. I forget the citation. It's not ours. We found it someplace else, but somebody did some research and said that only 37% of the time in the SOC is focused on high priority workflows, high priority alerts, right? So we always say to ourselves, what happened to the other 63%? Well, the other 63% is toil and syntax and complexity that we've confused over the years with analytic reasoning and analytic skill sets, right? Being able to tune a tool that is constantly generating too many false positives is not the same as being a detective and, being hot on the trail of the latest advanced persistent threat, right? So we've mired folks in way too much tool toil in the SOC environment.
Yeah. All right. Yeah, I think you're right. Let's talk next about the human AI collaboration idea. This comes up a lot. People want to know how AI can be integrated into, their own workflows, but today we're talking SOCs, so let's stick to that in ways that make human intelligence not better, but, make humans more effective using their intelligence rather than replacing human intelligence.
Yeah, absolutely. One of my favorite topics. The approach that our team is taking is that we agree right up front that human agency and accountability are fundamentally required in cybersecurity for the foreseeable future. There are teams out there that don't believe that. We think we're right and they're wrong, quite frankly. But that doesn't mean that cybersecurity workflows have to be slow. What we do is we use AI to accelerate human analysts from decision to decision that at speeds that, frankly, seem scarcely believable when you see them in action. And then on top of that, we use the AI to constantly chip away at bits of workflow that can be safely automated, but only with the explicit consent of the human at the center of that workflow. We call that, on our team, we call that adaptive automation. So it's that accelerating the decision making and then adaptively automating to continuously reduce the amount of toil that an analyst is subjected to is really transformative in terms of how fast you can treat risk nowadays in a SOC.
It's interesting. And obviously it's going to be hard to introduce like the listeners to all the tools the analysts might be using and where they might be replacing parts of their workflow with AI. But I'm just curious, like how you even do that. Are you looking at like, okay, I have an analyst. They spend, I don't know if analysts work 8-hour days, but let's just say they do. They spend 2 hours, driving to work. Okay, bad example. We probably can't replace that with AI yet. But they spend, 4 hours reading through, I don't know. God, I don't know what a SOC analyst does, but, some kind of report. And maybe we could use some sort of AI there. And, the third section of their day they spend doing this. And are you kind of like, I wonder if you have sort of like no offense to like structured, unstructured methods, but do you have like a structured method of looking at like where we can replace workflows with AI? Or is it sort of just like unstructured? Like, this is a really painful part of my day, William, you're my boss. I'm your employee. I would love to find a solution where instead of reading reports for 4 hours a day, I'm doing it for 2 hours, 3 hours. That would make me more effective when I have to like do my job of actually dealing with, 37%, right? We want to make sure you're optimized for that. So yeah, I'm just curious, like how you do integrate these AI tools into your workflows, because it's all so new and people got to do it in cybersecurity. But people want to do it in other areas too. So any way you could answer that would be enlightening.
Yeah, no, it's a great question, Oleg. I like it. What we find is that for our early adopters to get the most out of this tech, it involves a real commitment from our team. We need to go in side by side with their analysts, and we need to, study the day in the life, as you said earlier, and really ask them what their pain points are. And it's a great product story, right? Because product people are trained to go in and do this sort of customer interviewing. And you're frequently in a space where you have to figure out what they really need, and it might not be what they're actually saying to you. So you listen to the pain points, you listen to, I come in here and I read these things, and then I go and I do this based on what I read, and they don't realize that we can automate dozens or hundreds of hours of toil out of their life, right? And so we have to kind of work with them on current state, future state, study those workflows, ask them, hey, what are you really trying to get at? What are you really trying to get at? And when you finally define the end objective, well, I had to do all that reading. I had to develop all these questions. I had to toggle between all these screens, researching the answers to these questions so that I could decide, is this new piece of intelligence germane to my enterprise? Do I need to run to my CISO and say, hey, this latest threat intel report says we have a problem? When we show them that we can do that in 90 seconds, that's eye-opening for them. And then it generates enthusiasm. And then we keep working on, okay, what's the next workflow that you're really interested in?
Yeah. Thank you for answering that. Let's move on to key considerations for safe AI. How do you ensure safety and ensure that organizations remain, responsible and use AI ethically when it's like new territory, right? We don't even know exactly what's like safe because we probably don't know like all the dangers of AI and all the like bad things it can do. We're just like, it's all uncharted territory. So how do you approach that kind of problem?
Yeah, it's a big question. It's a massive topic. It's an area where we're very heavily invested. When Gen AI first hit the streets, Chat GPT stuff, cybersecurity practitioners flipped out. They went into kind of a full-on panic about the implications to data security, privacy, right? All of those things. The initial response in a lot of enterprises was no, just say no. But as the Gen AI ecosystem has continued to evolve, the market has fortunately brought safer ways to use pre-trained models like LLMs in scenarios where data is highly sensitive and highly regulated. The way I try to make this topic relatable for people is to describe what a buyer should demand from a vendor that builds AI for SOC tech, right? First and foremost, the vendor better be committed to top-notch security and compliance. It's table stakes. If your AI for SOC vendor hasn't signed the Secure by Design pledge with the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, you might want to ask yourself why. Then, to more directly answer your question about safe AI, any buyer should demand that the CTO and CPO of their vendor company be willing to sit in front of a dry erase board and diagram out all the data flows, where telemetry is stored and processed, and explain what data may or may not be used to train and tune AI models. Those are kind of the big categories of anxieties that we unpack as we work with our early adopters. These conversations can be revealing, and what buyers find out is that sometimes a vendor is really just slapping some chatbot-y thing on top of an existing tool, and the implications to their data isn't very good. The last thing you asked about, and I'm sorry, this answer is going a little bit long, I'm almost done. Ethics and responsible use, another huge area. It boils down to guardrails and training. You know, we can dig into that in more detail if you're interested, but at a high level, it's guardrails and training the people.
Please unpack it, because we don't really know what's dangerous. We don't know it's hard to know how to practice safely when you don't know all the dangers, and it's hard to know where to put the guardrails when, we haven't encountered like all the things that we can encounter. And training is how we sort of prepare for those situations. So yeah, any way you could unpack that be greatly appreciated.
Yeah, sure. Well, I think the story starts with the tech itself, right? These pre-trained models, and I'm stealing this from someone who I can't quote because it was a closed door session, but he's a brilliant thought leader in the pre-trained model space. And he described LLMs as being born as sociopaths, right? LLMs, when they first come out of training, will do and say really crazy things, right? Like almost anything. They hallucinate. People have heard about this by now, these infamous hallucinations that come from LLMs. So at the level of the LLM provider, you need to make sure that that's a responsible, ethical provider that has built its own guardrails in to make sure that the AI doesn't do destructive things and doesn't say really crazy, offensive stuff, right? But then when you take that LLM and you bake it into an AI for product, such as AI for SOC, you need your own context-specific guardrails and techniques to reduce errors, right? And there are a whole bunch of different ways to do that. And then when it comes to, training the people, they need to understand even just the very concept of ethical use and, what you should and shouldn't be using the AI for. Hopefully the guardrails work and people can't abuse the models outside of their intended scope, but they also shouldn't be trying. And, they should be educated on, this is a tool in your toolkit, just like you might give, a relatively young person a knife and say you're allowed to use this to slice your apple at lunch. You are not allowed to take this outside and go play with your buddies with it, right? So, there's a whole bunch of stuff involved with the guardrails and the training.
What is evidentiary AI, and let's just start there. Yeah, what is that? Did I even say it right?
Yeah, you did. Evidentiary AI, as we define it on my team, is AI that articulates itself in fine-grained detail. So the humans using it can understand every thought, observation, action, decision, and recommendation the AI makes in a way that can be quickly verified for accuracy, right? And you get a bunch of downstream benefits from that.
And who provides that, right? Because one of the properties of AI machines, as far as I know, is that they're a black box, right? You don't always know why they gave you what they did. So how do you ensure that there's evidence, I guess, when you're using one? How does that work?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I'll tackle it at my level of technical depth. When people talk about AI being a black box, a lot of times they're thinking about the LLM being a black box or some algorithm in some ML-based product being a black box. When you look in the AI for space, AI for SOC is the space that we're in, there's a lot more to it than the LLM, right? So, for example, if you buy Andesite, you're getting, yes, there's an LLM that we leverage. In fact, there are several, but more importantly, there's a proprietary agentic framework that makes the thing, smart and specialized in cybersecurity and makes it able to understand your organizational specific context, right? So picture it, being able to learn from your wikis and Confluence pages and, data that you have stored in PDFs and everything else, right? If you spend time building your agentic framework properly, as our team has, you can make sure that it's articulating everything that it's doing for you. So if it abstracts your analyst out of the need to write a Splunk query, an Elastic query, a SQL query, all these things, right? These are different query languages that are common in SOCs. You want to be able to see the query that it wrote. You want to be able to see the result that it came up with, and you want to see the evidence upon which that result was based. And that all becomes possible through the specific way that you engineer your product sort of on top of or in addition to that LLM.
That's awesome. I feel like you, explained it in a way where, it really answered some questions for me. So how about, questions I don't even know I'm having sometimes, but thank you. How can SOC teams ensure seamless integration of AI-powered solutions into existing ecosystems, right? Like we have something already that we're trying to secure here. What are the practical challenges of integrating a system like yours?
Yeah, it's an important question, Oleg. One of the reasons I mentioned SOAR earlier, security, orchestration, automation, and response. I'm trying not to bury your audience in cybersecurity specific terms, but that's an important one.
That.
Yeah. Well, one of the reasons SOAR failed was the overhead of keeping up with all of the connectors involved, right? So SOAR is a strategy where you connect to all the things, and as you're implying, and then you can automate between all the things, right? And I've seen, by the way, large enterprise teams that do amazing things with SOAR tech, but they invariably have highly competent teams tending to the ecosystem, right? It's super high maintenance. It's definitely not a set it and forget it situation. So as new AI for SOC tech vendors like us start hitting the market at scale, SOC teams would do really well to shift the burden to the vendors, right? I don't want to get into a ton of detail on this, but I will say that approaches are going to emerge that make it far easier to build and maintain connectors than has been the case in the past. And then against that backdrop, you'll see tech that can make sense of data across highly disparate data islands at machine speed without the need for so much hands-on data engineering, right? And then, finally, the main thing I'd really encourage teams to do to adopt this stuff is try to avoid vendor lock-in. I passionately advocate for an open model of ecosystem interoperability, and I think buyers should avoid the allure of big platform players who claim that if you just move all your data into their closed system, they'll solve all the problems for you. That approach has failed miserably for a lot of reasons, including that these big platform players fall victim to the innovator's dilemma, meaning they can't keep up with emerging tech.
Yeah, we've seen it a lot, I'm sure. How about federated data analysis? Can you define that, and how does it help organizations? What does it help organizations do?
Yeah, sure. I actually think this is one of the most exciting areas of this new tech, right? By delivering the ability to quickly connect, as I call them, these disparate data islands, organizations get to unlock actionable insights that would otherwise be impossible to surface if data silos were viewed in isolation, right? So you've got all of these different things. You've got vendors saying, hey, take all the data in all those things and just move it over here to my magical data lake and I'll solve all your problems. And, 2.5 years later, when that migration is done, the tech world has moved on and, your teams are angry from the trauma of all these big rip and replace projects, right? It's a time to value thing is what I'm saying here. When you provide a system that can immediately connect to all the different parts of your ecosystem, and then you combine that with the approach for the AI to reason over unstructured data at scale, it becomes mind blowing, right? And it allows you to we use this phrase, it allows you to democratize tribal knowledge, right? Again, back to wikis and Confluence pages and PDFs and unlocking insight that until now has required humans to read and sort of manually curate and unlock. You can do it at scale now.
It all sounds almost too good to be true. I don't want to go there, but how can you ensure that these insights you're generating so quickly are truly insights,
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think of it on two levels. If our CTO Alex were here, he'd probably have a much more detailed answer. But I think of it on the level of the tech and then the level of the workflow. So on the level of the tech, I mentioned guardrails before. There are guardrails and strategies to make sure that the information is accurate. For example, in agentic frameworks, you can assign an agent to review the work of the other agents and those sorts of things, right? There's all kinds of tricks of the trade that our engineers can employ. On the level of workflow, this is really core to what we're trying to do at Andesite, is keeping the human in that role of agency and accountability is key, right? So you can build the workflows in a way where the human is signing off on the result that was come up with, right? And they can very quickly verify it.
Right. Got it. So keeping humans in the loop is essential.
We think so. That's our approach for sure.
Right. I think we even covered that on an earlier question. Let's continue. What are the key skills and competencies that SOC analysis will need moving forward to develop effectively as workers alongside with, the tools that are coming in with AI?
Yeah, the most important thing analysts bring is their human intellect. It's exciting to be involved in unleashing that, their natural curiosity and reasoning. Our CEO, Brian, likes to talk about how analysts' pattern recognition and ability to turn insights into action is crucial. People who like to solve puzzles have always made great analysts. Now, with this type of AI in the SOC, they get to focus on that problem solving without having to worry about, the tyranny of that query syntax that we talked about. I will tell you, I get pushback from some CISOs that they don't want their analysts to get abstracted out of the query writing because that's how they learn. I respectfully disagree, but I acknowledge that it's going to take time for people to get used to how fast analysts can do their jobs when they get abstracted out of that toil. I think the analogy I use, I think back to being in school as a kid, listening to a teacher lecture us on the importance of knowing how to do square roots by hand, right? The last time I did a square root by hand was when I had to help teach my kids because they were getting lectured by a teacher who said it's super important to have to do square roots by hand, right? And by the way, I do want to make the point, if you think back to our discussion about evidentiary AI, that articulated AI, it makes it very easy for analysts to learn how to write the queries if that's something they want to master. So we do something we call in-workflow training.
Really cool. So how do you do a square root by hand?
I don't know. Let me ask my kids.
That's good. Yeah, no, I don't think I remember the last time I did one of those either, unless it was a nice square one. But those are generally easy answers. Anyway, I'm getting distracted. Let's talk about the future. What are the most promising areas for future research and development in AI-powered security solutions? What are you excited about?
Yeah, I need to be a little bit careful here. This is an extremely competitive space, and I certainly know what I'm most excited about. I'll say this. For a long time, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, there's been a lot of human curation and analysis that takes place at the junction between the data inside the firewalls and the data outside the firewalls, right? Big, well-resourced teams comb through intelligence, and then they look for relevant bits that matter based on the current state of that dynamic enterprise environment. The opportunity to apply newer agentic AI techniques to data at vast scale is a really exciting area to watch when you look specifically at the cybersecurity use case.
Let's do it big. Go big or go home.
Absolutely.
Awesome. All right. Well, we are running up towards the end here. Let's talk to the future security leaders who are looking to improve maybe themselves or their organization. What advice would you give to someone maybe in your position 20 years ago?
Oh my gosh. Well, there's a lot of advice I could give people, probably not to make some of the career choices that I have, but, specifically since we're talking about, AI for cybersecurity, I would tell them, if they're not already jumping in and familiarizing themselves with the tech that's hitting the market, they need to, but they also really need to ask hard questions about the security and compliance standards, the safe AI practices, the stuff we discussed earlier. It's super important. And then I would pull them aside and I would tell them, hey, on a human level, let's also make sure you're talking to your teams about this stuff, right? There's a lot of fear that AI is coming for cyber jobs. I think that hype is completely unwarranted, by the way, and it will be for a long time to come. When we look at our early adopters, they're not getting rid of their analysts. They're just making them happier and buying down a lot of risk with the current teams they have. So, the future's here. It's rolling out now. Jump in and get comfortable with it and make sure you're talking to your teams, because you might be surprised how much anxiety there is about this stuff.
Good advice. William, thank you. I think we got a little extra time here, so I'm going to add a bonus question. I don't want to surprise you too much, but, you seem well-read, well-listened type of person. And I'm just curious, has anything caught your interest lately that you're sort of digesting, whether it's, something you're reading online or not online or just listening to that might be kind of near and around this space or totally random, What's something that sort of caught your attention lately?
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of a book that a friend of mine released a while ago, but I just kind of dived back into it, and I'm just always so impressed with it. A woman named Nicole Perlroth wrote a book called "This Is How They Tell Me the World Ends," and it's about sort of the birth of the whole industry of bug bounties and finding vulnerabilities in software and how to marketize and productize that whole endeavor. And it's because of my background, coming from the intelligence community and having a background in cyber operations, I just find it absolutely fascinating. So if people have never heard of Nicole or haven't read her book, they should check it out. She does podcasts too, and she's just an incredible, brilliant woman. So definitely commend her work.
Fantastic. Yeah. Thank you for sharing. How about yourself? You do some good. No, I'm sure you do more than good work. But if people want to learn more about what you're doing, how can the listeners here listen and learn more about you and Andesite?
Yeah, we're not a super splashy team. We try to be sort of heads down and stay focused on our customers. But that said, we are getting out there a little bit more. The timing is right for our company. So you can find articles by our CEO, Brian Carbaugh, Carbaugh. Alex Thaman is our CTO. His name is Thaman, and me, William MacMillan. And, if you just Google us in cybersecurity, you'll see some articles, you'll find some podcasts that we're doing. And you can also obviously reach out to us at our website, andesite.ai, and on our company page on LinkedIn. We're pretty dispersed, but we're headquartered in Northern Virginia, and we have a big presence in Seattle where I am. So, if you want to grab a coffee with Alex or me and you're in Seattle, let us know. And we try to give our followers a heads up when we're going to be at cybersecurity conferences, that sort of thing. So, if all else fails, hit me up on LinkedIn. We'll figure it out.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for joining the show today, William. It was definitely interesting, and I think I learned quite a bit. I hope the listeners did too. Yeah, it was great. If you like the show and you're listening, please subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. Leave us a rating as long as it's 5 stars. To learn more about Angelneers, visit angelneers.com. Thanks to our chief Angelneer for producing and editing the show. William, again, thanks for joining us today. It was an insightful conversation, and best of luck on your journey ahead. I'm sure it'll be full of dangers, but you sound like you can handle it.
Thanks, Oleg. I really appreciate it. It was a lot of fun.